The year was 1867, and winter still clung hard to the Dakota plains. Wind swept across the prairie like a blade, cutting through every crack in the little log cabin that stood alone on the rise. Smoke trickled weakly from its chimney, more a prayer than a promise, and inside huddled three souls who had too little to keep them warm. Mary Ellen Price, a widow of just 30 years, pressed her hands to the rough-hewn table, her knuckles white from cold. The fire in the hearth was burning low, fed only by sticks her 7-year-old daughter had gathered before the storm set in. That girl, Ruthie, sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, pulling the ragged edges of a faded quilt over her thin shoulders. Beside her, little Caleb, barely 5, leaned against his sister, his breath fogging in the bitter air. The cupboard stood nearly bare. A crust of bread, some dried beans, and a strip of salted pork wrapped in cloth. It wasn't enough for the week, let alone the month. Mary Ellen's eyes lingered on her children with the tight ache of a mother who knew hunger better than rest. Ruthie's eyes, though tired, stayed sharp. She always watched the window, as if expecting something to break the monotony of snow and sky. And that morning, something did. At first, she thought it was the wind moving strange, carrying with a shape that didn't belong. Then she saw it, a figure stumbling to the white curtain, dragging a leg behind him, each step a desperate effort. He was small, no bigger than Ruthie herself, his body wrapped in buckskin torn and stained, his dark hair matted with frost. His lips moved without sound. "Mama," Ruthie whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Someone's out there." Mary Ellen's head snapped to the window. For a heartbeat she froze, fear knotting her chest. A child, yes, but not just any child. She knew that gait, that clothing. Native. Sioux or Cheyenne, perhaps. And where there was one, there might be many. "Keep the door barred," she said quickly, her voice tight with warning. But Ruthie's wide eyes never left the figure, now collapsing into the snow not 20 yards from their door. "He'll die," Ruthie said. Her voice cracked with urgency, soft but fierce. "Mama, he'll die right there." Mary Ellen's mind raced. She thought of the settlers' talk at the trading post. Raids, missing cattle, men cut down on the trail. Bringing that boy inside could invite wrath upon them. Yet leaving him in the snow meant certain death. Her hand trembled on the latch. Then Ruthie moved first. She darted the peg by the fire, snatched the thin quilt from her own shoulders, and before her mother could stop her, she flung the door open. The wind screamed through the cabin. Ruthie ran out barefoot into the snow, her breath clouding in the frozen air, and fell to her knees beside the boy. "Here," she whispered, wrapping the quilt around his shaking body. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, fluttered open for just a moment. She saw fear there, and pain, and something else, a flicker of recognition, as though he could not believe kindness had found him in this place. Then he collapsed against her, half-conscious. By the time Mary Ellen reached him, Ruthie's arms were already locked tight around him. The mother's heart fought her head, but she could not pry her daughter loose. Together, they dragged the boy inside, his boots leaving streaks of melting snow across the floor. The fire flared when Mary Ellen threw the last sticks upon it, though she cursed herself for doing so. The boy lay on a pallet near the hearth, breathing shallow, his leg twisted in a way that spoke of injury. Ruthie knelt beside him, stroking the wet hair from his brow with a tenderness too deep for her years. Mary Ellen's jaw clenched, her eyes darting to the window, to the endless prairie beyond. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "What have you done, child?" By morning, word had traveled fast. In a town where men measured each other by suspicion, nothing stayed secret for long. Mary Ellen led Ruthie and Caleb into the settlement to trade their last eggs for flour. But as soon as they stepped into the trading post, the air turned sharp. Men leaned against a counter, voices hushed but eyes burning holes through them. "That true," one muttered. She took one of them into her home. A Sioux brat. Another spat, his lip curling. "Damn foolish woman's going to bring the whole tribe down on us." Mary Ellen held her head high, though her cheeks burned. She kept Ruthie close at her side, but the girl's small hand trembled in hers. The storekeeper, a heavy man with tired eyes, avoided looking at her when she set down her eggs. "Reckon we don't want no trouble," he said low, counting out less flour than she was due. "Best you send that child back to where he came from." "He was freezing to death," Mary Ellen said, her voice steady but her chest tight. The man shook his head. "Freezing or not, he ain't your concern. You keep him under your roof, and you'll pay the price when they come knocking." As she gathered her sack, a drunk at the back of the room barked out, "Maybe they ought to burn that cabin before the warriors burn the whole town." The laughter that followed was bitter, hard. Ruthie looked up at her mother, eyes wide with hurt, but Mary Ellen only squeezed her hand tighter. They left without another word. Back at the cabin, the boy still lay weak, though his fever had broken. He stirred when Ruthie entered, his gaze flicking toward her, wary yet softened by recognition. He whispered a word she did not understand. Still, she smiled at him, offering him a sip of water from a tin cup. At night, Mary Ellen sat by the window with a rifle across her knees, staring into the black prairie. She told herself she had made a mistake, that the men in town were right. But every time she looked at Ruthie curled up by the boy's side, she saw something she could not name, something that bound her daughter's soul to the act she had done. The storm eased, but the prairie grew no kinder. Wolves howled at night, and the ground froze harder each morning. The boy regained strength slowly, but the limp in his leg remained. He rarely spoke, yet his dark eyes followed Ruthie with silent trust, as though she were his only anchor in this strange place. Still, Mary Ellen's unease only deepened. Each sound outside made her start. A branch snapping, a coyote yipping, hooves on the distant trail. She saw shadows where there were none, imagining a war party's approach. And then came the night when the shadows grew real. It began with a faint drumbeat, carried on the wind. Low, steady, unnatural in the stillness of plains. Mary Ellen rose from her chair, rifle clutched in her hands. Caleb stirred in his sleep. Ruthie, lying near the boy, lifted her head, eyes wide in the firelight. "Mama," she whispered. Mary Ellen pressed a finger to her lips. The drumbeat grew louder. Then came the thunder of hooves, rolling across the prairie like a storm breaking free. She rushed to the window. Her heart seized at the sight. Torches flared in the distance, weaving serpents of fire across the dark. Horsemen rode in numbers too great to count at first glance. The ground shook with their coming. The boy stirred, as if sensing them before anyone else. His eyes widened. He tried to rise, but his leg betrayed him, and he sank back with a cry. Ruthie rushed to the window beside her mother. Her small hand clutched at the windowsill. She saw them then, riders, painted in ochre and red, feathers trailing in the wind, spears glinting in firelight. Not 10, not 20, but near 50. They were coming straight for the cabin. Mary Ellen's voice caught in her throat. She dragged Ruthie back from the window, her mind racing. Run? Hide? Stand and fight? None of it seemed enough. The thunder grew deafening. Torches flickered closer, until the light spilled across the yard. The riders spread in a wide circle around the cabin, cutting off every path. And then came silence. A silence thicker than the snow outside, more terrible than the drums had been. Ruthie held her breath. Her heart hammered in her chest. She thought of the quilt she had wrapped around the boy. She thought of the way he had looked at her with trust. And as the first warrior dismounted, tall and grim in the torchlight, Ruthie knew that whatever storm she had invited with her act of kindness, it had come to their very door. The ground trembled, as if the earth itself shuddered at the weight of the riders. 50 horsemen circled the cabin, their torches casting long shadows that flickered like restless spirits against the snow. The horses snorted steam into the cold, stamping hooves that shook the frozen dirt. The sound was deafening to Mary Ellen, though not one warrior spoke a word at first. Ruthie clung to her mother's skirt, her small face pale as parchment. Caleb whimpered from his pallet, and the native boy sat upright now, his dark eyes wide, his breath coming fast. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from the recognition that had seized him. The circle broke. From the wall of riders, one figure dismounted and strode forward with a gait that carried both age and power. He was tall, his shoulders broad, his face marked by scars that ran deep, one line slashing across his cheek like a lightning strike. Feathers crowned his dark hair, eagle's wings that fluttered in the torchlight. He held a lance not as a threat, but as a statement of who he was. Mary Ellen knew at once she was staring at a chief. He stopped 10 paces from the door, his men watching in silence. Then, in English that carried the weight of command, he spoke. "You hide one of ours." The word struck like iron. Mary Ellen's voice caught in her throat, but Ruthie, trembling though she was, stepped forward. "We didn't hide him," she said, her small voice cutting through the air. "He fell in the snow. I gave him my blanket. He would have died." The chief's eyes narrowed, studying the child who dared to speak. Murmurs rippled through the warriors, though no one raised a weapon. From the shadows, the native boy rose with effort, hobbling forward until he stood in the doorway. His face, still pale with fever, lifted toward the circle of torches. A cry went up among the warriors, low and mournful, almost reverent. The boy's voice trembled in his own tongue. Words Ruthie did not understand, but which carried meaning enough by the way they fell heavy upon the riders. The chief's scarred face did not soften. He turned his eyes back upon Mary Ellen. "This boy is my blood," he said, "my brother's son. You touched him. You kept him in your fire." His jaw tightened. This could mean life, or this could mean death. The silence was broken only by the restless shift of horses, the crackle of flames in the torches, and the faint cry of an owl overhead. Then came a roar of voices, angry, divided, surging like a tide within the circle. Some warriors shouted in their tongue, their faces fierce, hands on weapons. Others raised their palms, shaking their heads, their voices calling for patience, for honor. The air pulsed with danger, the balance tilting one way, then the other. From the ridge beyond, where the settlement's men had gathered, the dim shapes of rifles gleamed in the moonlight. Mary Ellen saw them, neighbors with weapons leveled at the war party, waiting for the first spark to set prairie and sky ablaze. The chief lifted his lance, and silence fell again. His eyes burned into Mary Ellen's, then shifted to Ruthie. "Tell me," he said, his tone like thunder softened by rain. "Why would you, a settler's child, give life to my kin? Our people are not yours. We are not friends." Ruthie swallowed hard. Her hands shook, but she did not step back. "Because he was cold," she whispered. "Because he was hurt. Because I didn't want him to die." The chief's gaze did not move. "Many of your kind would have left him. Some would have finished him with a bullet." "I'm not them," Ruthie said. Her voice cracked but did not falter. "I'm me." The circle stirred with surprise, even laughter from a few riders who mocked her boldness. But the chief remained still, unreadable. At that moment, the boy spoke again, clutching the blanket Ruthie had given him. His words came broken in English. "She give me warm. She save." The declaration rippled through the warriors like fire catching dry grass. Some shouted with joy, others with outrage. Spears rattled, torches flared. From the ridge, a settler's voice cried out, "Let them go, you devils, or we'll fill you with lead." Mary Ellen's stomach dropped. Any wrong word, any wrong move, and this place would become a graveyard. She lifted her rifle but did not raise it to fire. She wanted only to shield her children, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. The chief raised his hand, silencing both his men and the distant settlers. His voice carried across the field. "The girl speaks of kindness, but words are wind. To know her heart, we must see it tested." He stepped closer, his shadow tall and sharp against the snow. "Bring her." 2 warriors dismounted and approached. Mary Ellen's heart seized, but before she could move, Ruthie stepped forward herself, chin trembling but lifted. She looked back once at her mother, whose eyes filled with tears she could not shed. Mary Ellen wanted to snatch her child back, to bar the door, to shout to the heavens that this was madness. But something in Ruthie's face stopped her, a quiet, stubborn fire. The warriors led the girl into circle. The torches hissed, the snow crunching under her small boots. 50 pairs of eyes bore down upon her. She stood tiny among them, the firelight casting her shadow long across the frozen ground. The chief spoke in his language, and the warriors answered in a chant that rose and fell like waves. Then he drew near, raising his hand above her. Fear is the measure of a heart. he said in English. "If your kindness is true, you will not tremble before our judgment." One warrior stepped forward with a tomahawk, lifting it high, his face painted red with fury. He swung it down, not upon her, but to strike the earth at her feet with a sharp crack. Snow flew. The steel glinted inches from her toes. Ruthie flinched but did not run. Her breath came fast, her eyes wide, but she stood rooted, clutching her small fists at her sides. Another warrior circled her, raising his spear so that its tip grazed her shoulder. He pressed, enough to draw a bead of blood. Ruthie bit her lip, silent, staring forward. The chief studied her in the firelight, his scar catching the glow. "You fear," he said, "but you do not flee." Ruthie swallowed hard. Her voice broke in the stillness, trembling but clear. "I just didn't want him to die." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Warriors shifted, some nodding, others frowning, all watching the chief. At last, he lowered his lance. His voice carried the weight of decision. "This child speaks with a heart truer than many men. She gave life when death would have been easy. She gave warmth when cold would have claimed him. She has courage. She has honor." He turned to his men, raising his lance high. "She is under my protection." The circle erupted, not with violence, but with voices. Some shouted defiance. Others cried agreement. The settlement's men on the ridge cursed, uncertain whether to fire or to hold. Mary Ellen rushed forward, seizing Ruthie as the warriors released her. She pulled her child to her chest, tears breaking free at last. The girl buried her face in her mother's dress, her body trembling. The chief's gaze lingered on them both, his expression unreadable, carved of stone yet softened by something unseen. He gave a sharp call, and his warriors stilled, awaiting his next word. The night had not ended in blood, but it had not ended in peace, either. The circle remained, torches burning, horses restless, eyes watching. A storm had been stayed, but only just, and as the chief raised his lance once more, Ruthie knew the test was not over. It had only begun. The night had not ended, though dawn drew close. The fire in the hearth had burned to coals, yet outside the world still blazed with torchlight. The warriors did not ride away after the chief's declaration. They lingered, their presence pressing down on the cabin like a storm unwilling to break. Mary Ellen sat with her rifle in her lap. Ruthie pressed against her side, Caleb still restless in his sleep. Across from them, the native boy lay awake, his eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the door. He seemed less a child now and more a bridge between two worlds, though his face still carried the fragility of youth. The door creaked open, and the chief stepped inside. His height filled the room, his feathers brushing the frame. Mary Ellen tensed, her finger grazing the trigger, but the man lifted a hand, no weapon drawn. "You save blood of my blood," he said, his deep voice rolling like distant thunder. "For this, I offer your family protection. No harm shall come from my people. This I give with my word." Mary Ellen's throat tightened. Protection? From one side, perhaps, but what of the other? She thought of the settlers on the ridge, their eyes sharp, their rifles ready. They would see this not as mercy, but as betrayal. "We didn't ask for protection," she said, her voice low. "We only did what was right." The chief's gaze flicked to Ruthie. "The girl gave her blanket when she had little. That act binds us. Whether you ask or not, my warriors will honor it." Outside, a murmur rose, men shifting impatiently. Mary Ellen knew it was not only warriors who waited, but neighbors too, watching from the dark. Already the line had been drawn, and so it began. The following day, when they rode into the settlement for flour, silence smothered them. Eyes followed, hard and unyielding. Men leaned against doorways, hands resting near pistols. A woman pulled her child away from Ruthie, as though the girl carried plague. At the trading post, the storekeeper would not meet Mary Ellen's eyes. "We got nothing for you here," he muttered, though the shelves behind him were full. "You can't starve us," Mary Ellen said, her voice sharp. The man's jaw tightened. "You made your choice, bringing them to your door. Let them feed you." Anger flared in Ruthie's chest, though she bit it back. Her mother's hand gripped hers tightly. pulling her away before more words could be said. By evening, the family sat hungry in the cabin. The boy tried to share strips of dried venison gifted by his people, but Mary Ellen hesitated. To eat it would be to take a side. To refuse it would dishonor the act of kindness that had begun all of this. At last, she accepted, though her eyes brimmed with quiet shame. It was not long before the backlash grew sharper. One night, as Ruthie carried water from the well, a man stepped from the shadows, the sour stench of whiskey on his breath. He was one of the settlers, his face twisted with hate. "Little squaw lover," he spat. His hand shot out, seized her arm. She cried out, the bucket clattering to ground. Mary Ellen burst from the cabin, rifle raised, but before she could aim, the darkness behind the drunk shifted. Out of it stepped two warriors, silent as a night. Their presence was like stone and water, sudden, immovable. The man released Ruthie with a curse, stumbling back into the dark. The warriors said nothing. They only bowed their heads slightly toward Ruthie, then vanished into the trees. Mary Ellen's heart twisted with both relief and dread. Protection had come, yes, but so had division. The settlers would see this as proof of their betrayal. They were no longer merely neighbors. They were enemies in their own town. The world had narrowed to two paths, both dangerous, and Mary Ellen did not know which would claim them first. The prairie stretched wide and endless beneath a cold, hard sky. Days passed with unease thick as smoke. The family lived caught between two worlds, rejected by their own, watched over by the other. Then came the day the chief returned. He rode with a small band, no more than 6 warriors, and dismounted with gravity that hushed the very air. In his hands, he carried a bundle wrapped in tan hide. "For the girl," he said. Ruthie's eyes widened as he placed it in her arms. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing pelts, dried meat, and at its heart a small carved token, an eagle, wings spread wide, etched from bone. "Carry this," the chief said, his voice solemn. "If danger comes, show it. It tells all who see that you are under our wing." Mary Ellen's heart ached at the sight. Such a gift was more than a token. It was a claim. They belonged to no one but themselves. And yet now they bore the mark of allegiance, whether they had chosen it or not. When Ruthie asked what it meant, Mary Ellen knelt and took her daughter's hands. "It means you did something so right, so true, that it changed everything. But it also means we'll pay a price for it." And the price came swift. At the trading post next week, a group of men blocked their path. One, broad-shouldered with scar along his jaw, stepped close. "Heard you got yourself new friends," he sneered. "Maybe you'd rather live with them than among decent folk." Mary Ellen kept her voice steady. "We've harmed no one. We ask only to live in peace." The man spat at her feet. "Peace ended the day you threw in with them. You've chosen your side." Tension coiled like a rattler ready to strike. Ruthie's hand reached for her pocket, where the carved eagle rested. She wanted to hold it up, to show them, to prove they were not alone. But Mary Ellen caught her wrist before she could move. Not here. Not now. That night, the cabin shook with stones hurled against its walls. Men shouted in the dark, their curses thick with hate. But before Mary Ellen could light her lamp, war cries split the night. The settlers scattered, their courage broken by the sudden appearance of shadowed warriors on the ridge. Silence followed, heavy and complete. When the morning came, Ruthie sat by the fire, clutching the token in her small hands. "Mama," she whispered, "did I do wrong, giving him the blanket?" Mary Ellen gathered her close, pressing her lips to the child's tangled hair. "Kindness is never wrong," she said softly, "even if the world hates you for it." The fire crackled. The boy slept soundly at last, his face no longer strained with fever. Outside, the prairie stretched vast and indifferent, yet in that little cabin, something unyielding had been born. The narrator's voice rose like the wind across the plains. On the frontier, survival demanded steel. But sometimes steel alone was not enough. Sometimes it was a child's hand, small and fragile, that built a bridge where none should exist. And so this tale reminds us mercy can cost, but it can also change the course of hearts harder than iron. If this story moved you, Don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts below. For on the frontier, every voice was a spark against the dark. And so is yours.